and the two lines of humanity. If you're looking at your chart, we've covered the first three rows across there, the creation, the fall, and the two lines of humanity. That's where we left off. And we're moving now into chapter 6. We're going to talk about the flood a little bit, chapter 6 through 9. And the flood is dated, as you can see from your chart, approximately 2300 BC. If you stop and think about that, that's not all that long ago. It's, what, 4,000 years ago, a little over 4,000 years ago. So not all that long ago in terms of, when the evolutionist speaks of millions and millions and millions of years, 4,000 years ago is not all that long ago on their way of thinking. But it's, for us, I guess it's a long time ago. But 2300 BC, that's a little bit before Abraham. Abraham comes along about 300 years after that. But you have key characters during this time: Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Who are those other three individuals beside Noah? They are his sons. Best I can tell, and different translations will render it different ways. The best I can tell, Japheth was the oldest, and I believe Shem, if I'm not mistaken, was the youngest. Shem is the father of a number of nations, but one in particular I'm thinking of are the Semitic peoples, which are, from them would descend the Jewish people. So in other words, Abraham would fall into the line of Shem, and the Jewish people would fall in that line as well. Now there are other Semitic peoples as well, but certainly the Jews would fall in that category. Notice still on your far right column, up to this time, still no Bible books written. Nothing has been written. All of this is happening in the world, at least what we can read about. It's happening in the world, but none of it is being written about. It doesn't get written about until the time of Moses, which is still quite a ways down the road. Moses is given by the power of the Holy Spirit the ability to look into the past. Just as the prophets also could look into the future, Moses looked into the past and was able to write with accuracy these stories about creation and the flood and all that. Now, there's an interesting thing about some of the other cultures in the world. They all have old flood stories. Now, they don't necessarily track with the Bible, but they all have ancient flood stories. What does that tell us, you think?
It really happened.
Yeah, that there's some historical reality behind all of this. If every culture all over the world, ancient culture, has a flood story, then there must have been some reality back of that. This flood really happened. When we lived in Kentucky, we lived on top of this hill, and I could walk over that hill and pick up all day long fossil rocks, all day long, fossilized plant stems. And it takes, anybody know what it takes to make a fossil? Huh? It takes a lot of time, but it also takes water. It takes water. How did water get on them hills in Kentucky? Water, those hills were covered with water. They had to have been for those fossils to be there. So there is evidence for these stories outside the Bible is what I'm driving at here. But we think about the flood story here, and you got a lot of people will come along and they'll say, well, that was a regional flood. It was not a worldwide flood. It was just in the region there where Noah lived. What do you think about that? Is there any veracity, any validity to that? How would you answer that if someone come along and said, well, it was a localized flood?
Well, it says it covered the whole earth. Why would a ship end up on the mountains of, an ark on the mountains of Ararat?
Right.
And if it says in the Bible, it covered the whole earth.
Yeah.
It wasn't just a region.
Yeah, and I agree 100% with what you're saying. But the word earth can be translated land. That's what they'll tell you, and they're right. It can be translated land. So just this land right here is all that was flooded. The whole earth or the whole land right here. That's what they would say. Now again, I agree with you. I think you're right. But I want you to think about how you would answer someone if they would, and what you said is good. The Bible actually says it covered the whole earth. So that's one piece. Now, unbelievers usually don't accept that because they don't accept the Bible to start with. But think about it for just a second. If the flood was just going to be in a little old region of Mesopotamia, why build an ark? Why not just say, Noah, just move north about 200 miles? I mean, wouldn't that be a lot easier than building an ark, spending 120 years building an ark? when you could just move north or south or west or east about 200 miles, you'd be out of danger. It just doesn't track with the story at all. But these are the things that people throw at you to show that, well, they don't really believe the Bible account. Also, there's a little thing happened at the end of the flood, a little promise, the rainbow promise. What's God promise when he sees the rainbow? What's the promise? Okay.
They'll never do that again.
Never have a flood again, but we have floods all the time. There you go. That's what I'm driving. There's your another piece of evidence right there. What in the world does that promise mean? In chapter 9, verse 11, I'm sorry. Thus I establish my covenant with you. Never again shall all flesh be cut off by the waters of a flood. Never again shall there be a flood to destroy the earth. If it was a local flood, that's a lie. That verse isn't true, because there's local floods all the time. So it had to have been a worldwide flood. When you look at the evidence there, had to have been a worldwide flood. He even uses that idea of destroying the world or destroying the earth with a worldwide flood. So these are just pieces of evidence. I'm just throwing it out there. I know you believe this, but I'm talking about stuff you might encounter when you're talking to other people, when they try to create doubt in the flood story. Now about the animals on the ark. Usually when you see these sometimes little kids will have play toys, and they'll have 2 giraffes and 2 hippopotamuses and 2 elephants, and sometimes you see it in a cartoon, you'll see the same thing, or a picture in a Bible story book. But that's not exactly right, is it? What actually happened in terms of the animals?
There was 2 of the unclean, and then there was 7 sets of the clean, so that they could eat and so that they could sacrifice and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, there was 2 pair and 7 pair of each kind of animal, the clean and the unclean. This is over in chapter 7, verses 1 and 2. The Lord said to Noah, "Come into the ark, you and all your household, because I have seen that you are righteous before me in this generation. You shall take with you 7 each of every clean animal, a male and his female." So that's 7 pairs. Okay, so you have 14 of them. And 2 each of animals that are unclean, a male and his female. So you have 4 of them, 2 pairs of those. 7 pairs of the clean and 2 pairs of the unclean. So it wasn't just 2 by 2 by 2, as we sometimes traditionally see pictured. They went into the ark 2 by 2, but it wasn't just 2 of these and 2 of these and 2 of these.
That's where people get the confusion from.
Yeah, there were 7 pairs and 2 pairs. And as you point out, the clean animals, when Noah got off the ark, anybody remember what he did? He sacrificed. Of course, they'd have to sacrifice the clean ones. Over in chapter 8 and verse 20, Noah built an altar to the Lord, and he took of every clean animal and every clean bird and offered burnt offerings on the altar. So that's why there were extra animals. You'd have to have food. I think you pointed out you'd have to have food to eat, for one thing, for a year. And then you have to have sacrifices when the thing is over, when the flood is over with. And Noah's offering those sacrifices of the clean animals. You wouldn't offer the unclean, you would offer the clean. So the traditional picture we sometimes have of just 2 giraffes and 2 hippopotamuses and 2 monkeys, that's not exactly right. There were 7 pairs of the clean and 2 pairs of the unclean. So there are quite a few animals on that ark. Now, here's another question that comes up. How would you get, and we sort of touched on this a couple of weeks back, but we didn't get into too much detail. How would you get every species of animal on the ark? If there's 7 pairs of clean and 2 pairs of unclean, how would you get every species of animal on the ark? There you go. Kind. You don't have to have every species. Every kind. Every kind. And the word species is a modern term. It really isn't used. The Bible word is kind, a created kind. And so you have, the other day we talked about the canine kind. That's dogs. And under that category would not just be domestic dogs, but wolves, hyenas, all these different breeds and different species that differentiate through breeding, and over time they differentiate into all these different species. Same thing with mankind. For all we know, Adam and Eve were black. We don't know whether they're black or whether they're yellow or what color they were, but over time we differentiated into all the different races of men. animals differentiated in all the different species. They do that even today. They breed new species of dogs all the time, new species of cattle all the time. So through breeding and stuff, those would change. You wouldn't have to have every species, just every created kind. The canine kind, the feline kind, the bovine kind, and all of that. You just have to have each kind, not each species. So we wouldn't have to do that. Plus, the fish, they don't need to be on the ark. So you're going to do it with a lot of kinds right there. They're going to stay right in the water. They're not going anywhere. So you don't have to have them. So sometimes people, they make those objections, but they haven't really thought about the fact that you wouldn't need every single different species. You wouldn't need every breed of dog and every breed of wolf and every breed of horse. You wouldn't need that. That is unnecessary. Those would all develop again after time through different breeding and different climate circumstances and things like that. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that we sometimes get hit with on these stories. Yeah, there's one about the dinosaurs. It's possible that they were on the ark. It's possible they perished in the flood. Also, when you think about taking them on there, you wouldn't have to have every single species, for one thing. And for another thing, they could have been taken on as babies. You wouldn't have to have a full-grown woolly mammoth. You could have a baby, and that would take up less space. So there's all sorts of ways that you can, and some of you have already visited. I've not had a chance to go yet, but some of you have already been to that Noah's Ark exhibit. And they've got a lot of that stuff kind of explained out in a nice way that you can understand it. But one of these days, I'm going to take a trip over. I'm going to take my little granddaughter, Anna, and all of us going to go over. I'd love to see that.
They also make the argument that it's no way possible you could get enough food in for 40 days. And when you really think about it, first of all, if God created everything, He can put them into a slumber where they sleep, because if they would have to eat and get the waste in the boat too, that would be terrible for 40 days to have all their waste.
Yeah, that would be quite a chore. But again, that exhibit there has got an explanation for all of that. But yeah, it's possible too. He could have put them into a hibernative state, so that, or at least some of them into a hibernative state. So all these things are possible explanations. But the reason I'm just bringing all that up is because people throw that stuff at you, and you need to kind of be halfway prepared to have an answer when they do that, because they're trying to discredit the Bible and undermine your faith in the Bible. And there are answers to all of these things. Okay, another thing that has always kind of bugged me just a little bit, and I don't know what the full answer is. I've kind of got an idea. But you look at chapter 5 and verse 29. And he called his name Noah. This is the birth of Noah, saying, "This one will comfort us concerning our work and the toil of our hands because of the ground which the Lord has cursed." Noah's going to lift the curse. Isn't that what that says? Isn't that what that says? I believe that's what it says. And then we move on out to chapter 8, after the flood, in verse 21. And the Lord smelled a smoothing aroma. That's those sacrifices that Noah's offering. And the Lord said in his heart, "I will never again curse the ground for man's sake." Was the curse lifted after the flood? It seems like it says it is. What do you think about that? That's something to chew on, ain't it? That's one of the things that makes you go, That's always kind of bugged me just a little bit.
I wonder how bad it was.
Yeah.
What we got now, we have to keep chopped down.
Yeah. And I think you're on the right track. Because I wouldn't bring it up without having an answer. So I've got a little bit of an answer here. There was the original curse. Cursed be the ground for thy sake. I believe from other scriptures that curse is still in place. Cursed be the ground for thy sake. But there were additional curses down through the time. For example, look at chapter 4, verses 11 and 12. This is when Abel killed his brother, or Cain killed his brother. It says, God said to Cain, "So you are now cursed from the earth." Look, there's the word cursed. You are cursed from the earth, which has opened its mouth to receive the blood from your hand, your brother's blood from your hand. When you till the ground, this is specifically directed at Cain. When you till the ground, it shall no longer yield its strength to you. A fugitive and a vagabond you shall be on the earth. There was added curse on top of that, on top of the original curse. This was directed specifically at Cain. So, and that kind of goes to your point. It could be that at different periods the curse was added to. And in a way, couldn't you count the flood as an additional curse? I mean, that's pretty destructive to the earth. That was pretty destructive to the, and God right on the heels of that in chapter 8, he says, I will never again curse the ground, nor will I destroy every living thing. And those are parallel thoughts. So that flood was an additional curse. The curse placed on Cain was an additional curse. And so these are the things that Noah brought relief for. At least in my mind, I don't know how else you'd reconcile that, because the full curse isn't lifted until Revelation 22, when we get to heaven. It says there shall be no more curse. Remember that? We read that the other day when we were studying Romans 8. So I think you were on the right track there, Joan, that I think that there were times perhaps when the curse was even worse than it is now. There's been some relief. It's not as bad as it was. It's still there, but it's not as bad as it was. Questions or comments on any of that? Anything we've talked about so far? Okay. Anybody know how long they were in that ark? I know how long it rained, but how long were they in that ark? Huh? Who said so? Somebody said so. That's how many days the waters went up, and then there was some time for the water to go down. Let's yeah, it was about a year. About a year. Noah was Genesis 7:7. Noah was 600 years old when the flood waters were on the earth. Okay, and then I'm trying to find it. I think it's in chapter 8. It tells us how old he was when he came off the ark, if I'm not mistaken. What is it? 8:13. It came to pass in the 601st year. Yeah, 601st year. So 1 year. He went into the ark in his 600th year, came off the ark in his 601st year, the first month, the first day of the month. So it'd been a full year that they were on that ark, floating around. So I think the 150 days that you mentioned earlier was the amount of time that the waters went up. The rain rained for 40 days, but then you know how it is, as the water's trying to find places to go, it goes up and up and up and up and up, and for 150 days, and then after that it starts going down, down, down real slow. So you can see 150 days, that's nearly half a year right there going up. So it would take about that long for it all to go down to where it was before. So imagine that, being cooped up on that ark.
Food for a year.
Yeah, had to have food for a year. And the ark was approximately a football field and a half long, 450 feet long, and about 45 feet tall, and I think 75 feet wide. And if you think about it, that's big, but it's not huge. Can you imagine and then you got all the animals on top of that. So being cooped up on that ark, and there ain't a soul around anywhere else. Nobody else to talk to but your kinfolk. You know how your kinfolk can get on your nerve. A year in this ark with you, but that's all he had. It's just Noah and his wife and his sons and their wives. Do what?
Got plenty of space to walk.
Yeah.
I'm going down to the lower levels. But to me, that's amazing to think about being on that ark for a whole year. That's, you can read it and it just doesn't, until you just stop and think about it, it's like, wow, that's really something. And this is all a testament to their faith. They wouldn't have been on that ark in the first place if Noah hadn't found grace in the eyes of the Lord because of his faithfulness. It says Noah walked with God. Same thing it says about Enoch. Enoch walked with God, Noah walked with God. And so he wouldn't even been there if it wasn't for God's grace. But then for a whole year, just the 8 of them right there, and then all the animals. Man. All right. Anything else before we move on from the flood? Again, I'm not getting into detail, verse by verse detail. We're just kind of passing over all this stuff and just trying to get an idea of Bible history and how it's all put together.
Rainbow, people made it into something, you don't need, you look, if you're not careful, you look at it in a different way that, you know, the gays and stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Rainbow is sickening.
Yeah, what was that T-shirt? What was that? What did it say?
It came from the thing, but God made the rainbow for, I cannot.
Something about we take the rainbow back or something like that.
Yeah, and I got, some girl gave it to me.
Yeah, we're taking our rainbow back. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. They like to use the rainbow for the gay community and all that. But that's, you know, God had one thing in mind when He put it out there, and others co-opt that. It's sad, but that's the world we live in. All right, let's move on to the next phase then. Genesis 10 and 11. This is when the humanity begins to spread. Remember, the original command, be fruitful, multiply, and, there's one more thing. Be fruitful, multiply, and, remember?
Spread out for a while.
Fill the earth. Yeah, fill the earth, which is another way of saying spread out. I don't want you to stay in one place. I want you to fill this planet up with people. And that was the command. It was the command at the beginning with Adam, and it's the command again with Noah. In Genesis 9 and verse 1, God blessed Noah and his sons, and He said, be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth. So the command is given, I want you to fill it up with people. Now in chapter 10, you've got they call it the table of nations. And I didn't do the digging because we're doing an overview here, but this shows where the different descendants settled and the different peoples and the different nations came from. But then you get into chapter 11, we get that story about the Tower of Babel. There's a lot of misunderstanding about that story. The main transgression goes back to that command, be fruitful, multiply, and fill the earth. And they weren't doing that. They decided, we're going to stay right here on the plains of Shinar. The plain is a big flat, there's no mountains around, it's flat for miles and miles and miles. We're going to stay right here instead of filling the earth, which is exactly the opposite of what God told them to do. And we're going to build us a skyscraper. Understand this, the Tower of Babel was not a tower to go up to God's heaven. They weren't trying to get up to God's heaven. Okay, even a little child knows when you start stacking little blocks, what happens when they get up so high? Even a little child knows that. Those people back then in Genesis, they knew that. They weren't trying to build a tower to God's heaven. Let's take the elevator up to the top floor. Ding, heavenly floor, step out. Hello, God. That's not what they were trying to do. That's not what they were. Remember the word heaven. 3 heavens, right? The first heaven is the sky. That's where they were going, a skyscraper. So from the plains of Shinar, no matter where they are on those plains, they can look, there's home back over there. And we're right back over, we know right where to go. So they were building them a landmark. They were going to stay right there instead of filling the earth. They weren't trying to go. Now the second heaven,
Space.
what happens when you get up in there? Can't breathe. And the third heaven, if you can't even breathe in outer space, you're not going to make it to God's heaven. Okay, so they had enough sense to know that. So the Tower of Babel is not about building a tower all the way to God's heaven. That's absurd. And those people were smart enough to know that. So they're building a big landmark, a big skyscraper there. And let's just read through that. I think it's about 7 or 8, 9 verses maybe. The whole earth had one language and one speech. Don't know what the language was, but they all spoke the same thing. And it came to pass as they journeyed from the east that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. Now this would have been somewhere in the Middle East. I don't have a Bible map. You may have one in your Bible that will show where Shinar is, but they dwelt there. And they said, come and let us make bricks and bake them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone and asphalt for mortar. And they said, come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower whose top is in the heavens, up in the sky. Okay? Now, they're not going to God's heaven. That's not where they're going. They got enough sense to know they can't do that. But way up there, big, tall skyscraper. In fact, they have found some of these types of towers in that area. They're called ziggurats, and they're built kind of like a layered cake. You got a section here, and then another section that's a little bit smaller on top of that, and then another section, kind of like you've seen those cakes that are built like that. That's kind of the way those ziggurats are built. layer by layer by layer, and each layer gets successively smaller until it gets to the top, to however high they're going. But let's build ourselves a city and a tower whose top is in the heaven. Let us make a name for ourselves. Look at this. Lest we be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth. That's exactly what God told them to do. I want you to fill the earth. I want you to scatter. I want you to fill this planet up with people. They said, no, we're going to stay right here. So this is direct disobedience to God, as blatant as it can be. And that's why all this happened, okay? So they're rebelling against God. So the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the sons of men had built. And the Lord said, indeed, the people are one. They're united. And they all have one language. And this is what they begin to do. Now nothing they propose to do will be withheld from them. God is saying here, if I don't put a stop to this rebellion will just get worse and worse and worse. We just come off a big flood because of sin and rebellion. Okay? And if I let this go, it's all going to be right back like it was. So God had to do something. Okay? Come, let us go down there. Us? Who's us? Yeah, the Godhead. That's the Godhead. Just like it was in the beginning there. Let us make man in our image. Come, let us go down there and confuse their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord scattered them abroad from there over the face of all the earth, and they ceased building the city. Therefore its name is called Babel. The word Babel means confusion. Because there the Lord confused the language of all the earth, and from there the Lord scattered them abroad over the face of all the earth. So they seem to have been traveling together, seemingly, until they got to the plains of Shinar. And then they said, we're going to stay right here. And God said, no, you're not, because that's not what I told you to do. So he went down there and confused their language. Well, how did that stop them, by the way?
They couldn't understand each other.
Yeah. If you can't communicate with each other, you're not going to get much done. So he confused their tongues, their languages, and they could no longer communicate, and so they had to stop, and they had to go elsewhere. So presumably the people who spoke the same language went off together, and those who spoke this other language went off that way together, you would assume, so they could communicate with each other. But that was the Lord's way of getting the people to spread out, because they weren't spreading out as they should have been. Questions? Comments?
There's so many different languages today.
Yeah, I think that's what this is trying to tell us, that God did this, that God created the different languages. And this is kind of the origin story. Again, as I said, I think it was last week, so many origin things in the book of Genesis. The origin of creation, the origin of man, the origin of marriage, the origin of sin, the origin of the plan of salvation, and now the origin of languages. It's all right there in those first chapters of Genesis. And that becomes the foundation for the rest of the Bible. That's why these things are so important, because they're foundational stories that carry on through the rest of the Bible. In fact, we're getting ready here in chapter 12 to talk about the call of Abraham. And from there, the Bible narrowly focuses. You know, we've been looking at everything in a broad picture, and Noah and the flood, the whole world, and scattering over the world. And all of a sudden, we're going to zoom right in on one family, the family of Abraham. Because God is going to build him a nation. And to use plain old country speak, God's going to use Abraham for breed stock. You know, God could have picked any nation that was on the earth. There were already nations on the earth. There was the Assyrians and the Babylonians. There were other nations upon the earth in that day and time. And God could have picked one of them, but he said, no, I'm going to build one. I'm going to build a nation out of Abraham. So he used Abraham for breed stock, built his own nation of the Jewish people, through whom he was going to bless all of mankind, through that Messiah who was going to come. So starting in Genesis 12, the Bible narrows down and focuses on the family of Abraham and the Jewish people. Prior to that, we were looking at the world, the worldwide flood, the creation of the world, the worldwide flood, spreading out over the world, filling the earth. And now all of a sudden, we're going to zero in on one family. All right, any other questions or comments before we go further? Okay. Now, starting here in chapter 11, down toward the end of the chapter, you got the genealogy that leads up to Abraham. And verse 10, this is the genealogy of Shem. That was Noah's youngest, if I remember correctly. That was his youngest son. Doesn't matter whether he's youngest or oldest, but anyway, this is the father of the Shemites or the Semites or the Semitic peoples, okay? So he traces his genealogy, and he goes on down, all the way down here to about verse, I'm skipping over a lot here, down to verse 24. We come down to Nahor. So this is the lineage of Shem. Nahor lived 29 years and begot Terah. After he begot Terah, Nahor lived 119 years and begot sons and daughters. Really quickly, it popped in my head while I was reading that. After the flood, you'll notice that the lifespans get shorter and shorter and shorter. You know, before the flood, it's like 950 years, 930 years, and after the flood, they start getting shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter. Probably because of the curse and everything is, the whole land is cursed, all of material creation is cursed, probably because of that, but lifespans get shorter. Nahor lived 119 years, begot sons and daughters. Verse 26, Terah lived 70 years and begot Abram, Nahor, and Haran. This is the genealogy of Terah. Terah begot Abram, Nahor, and Haran. Haran begot Lot. Now you see some names we recognize, see? And you're getting down to the family of Abraham and Lot and all of that stuff. And Haran died before his father Terah in the native land in Ur of the Chaldeans. And Abraham and Nahor took wives. The name of Abraham's wife was Sarai, and the name of Nahor's wife was Milcah, the daughter of Haran, the father of Milcah, and the father of Iscah. But Sarah was barren, and she had no child. And Terah took his son Abram and his grandson Lot, the son of Haran, and his daughter-in-law Sarai, and his son Abram's wife, and they went out with them from the Ur of the Chaldeans to go to the land of Canaan. And they came to Haran and dwelt there. So this is all setting it up. This is the line of Noah's son Shem. There in that last part of chapter 11, leading right up to Abraham. And that's going to set the stage for what follows with the promises to Abraham. That puts us down on the next line as you're going down your chart there, where it says Jewish focus. That's where everything kind of zeroes right in on one family, the family of Abraham. And of course from there, by the way, that will expand. You zero in on Abraham, but that will expand because Abraham's going to have a son, Isaac. Isaac's going to have a son named Jacob. Jacob's name is going to be changed to Israel. And he's going to have how many sons? 12. And those 12 sons become the 12 tribes, and the 12 tribes become the nation. So it expands back out from one person to a whole nation. So we're looking at the Jewish nation. So it kind of fans back out. And then from there, it'll eventually fan back in the New Testament, down to one. Who's that, anybody know? Jesus Christ. Yeah, it'll all fan right back out because he's that descendant of Abraham through Shem. So by the way, if you were to look at Luke's gospel, when he traces the genealogy, Shem will be in that lineage because that's the son of Noah, was the one through whom the Christ came. It's Shem, the son of Noah. All right, looks like we're about out of time. Any last minute questions? We'll start right there where it says Jewish focus. I will probably have some new sheets ready for the next phase. The next phase will be the Mosaic age after this. So I'll probably have some new sheets ready for you, and we'll finish this sheet up too. And that'll be, 2 weeks out because our meeting's next week.